A broke student let a stranger use his phone, unaware she was a millionaire who'd later call him with a life-changing offer. The wind bit sharply through Brian's thin jacket as he stood beneath the cracked plastic awning of the bus stop, his breath fogging in the cold air. The sun had dipped below the skyline, painting the sky a bruised mix of purples and gray. He shifted from foot to foot, trying to generate warmth, his fingers numb as he stuffed them deeper into his pockets. His phone, nearly dead, displayed just 2% battery. He sighed, wishing the bus would come faster. After a 10-hour shift bussing tables, all he wanted was to get back to his freezing studio apartment and collapse. Then he saw her. A woman, maybe in her late 30s or early 40s, moving quickly toward him across the sidewalk. Her heels clicked against the pavement, but her eyes were wide and frantic. She looked out of place here, elegant, dressed in a tailored coat that was probably worth more than Brian's rent, hair styled though slightly windblown. She paused in front of him, breathless. "Excuse me," she said, her voice urgent but composed. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but my phone was just stolen. I need to call my driver. It's an emergency. Could I please borrow your phone?" "Just for one call." Brian blinked. The cold had dulled his reflexes, and the request took a second to register. She gestured quickly, sensing his hesitation. "I understand how this sounds, but I'm really in trouble. My car broke down near a construction site 2 blocks away. I was trying to walk to the main road when someone bumped into me and snatched my phone. Please, I just need to make a call." Brian glanced at his screen. 1%. He hesitated. He didn't know her, and his phone, old and barely holding charge, was his only link to the world. But there was something in her eyes, not desperation exactly, but a quiet intensity that made him believe her. He unlocked the phone and handed it over. "Go ahead." The woman took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you, truly." She turned slightly away, dialed a number from memory, and spoke quietly but clearly. "It's me. I'm on 5th and Halston. My phone's gone, but I'm safe. Can you come pick me up here?" "No, don't call the police. It's fine. Just hurry, please." She ended the call and exhaled. "Thank you," she said again, returning the phone. "You didn't have to do that." Brian shrugged, pocketing the nearly dead device. "It's okay. You looked like you needed help." "I did." She gave him a closer look now. "What's your name?" "Brian." He said it simply, without expecting anything. "Well, Brian," she said, offering a small, sincere smile, "you've probably saved me from a lot of trouble tonight." He smiled back faintly. "Glad I could help." A long pause followed. She looked like she wanted to say more, but headlights appeared at the end of the road. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb with silent precision. She turned toward it, then paused again. "You're a student?" she asked, eyeing the university logo on his tattered backpack. "Yeah," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Final year, trying to make it through." She nodded. "That explains the exhaustion." He laughed softly. "Yeah, that and everything else." Her eyes lingered on him. Then she stepped back toward the car, the door held open by a driver in a suit. Before getting in, she looked over her shoulder. "Take care, Brian." "You too," he said, raising a hand. She disappeared into the car, which glided away into the dusk. Brian watched it go, rubbing his hands together. He checked his phone. Dead. He sighed, turned back toward the road, and waited. He didn't know he'd just handed his phone to Clara Whitmore, media-shy heiress, tech investor, and founder of one of the most influential philanthropic foundations in the country. Nor did he know that she hadn't just seen a tired student at a bus stop, but something else entirely. Something she hadn't seen in a very long time. And though the moment felt small, almost forgettable, it would soon echo louder than he ever imagined. Clara had made the call swiftly, her voice composed but clipped, like someone used to issuing commands and expecting results. Once she hung up, she held Brian's phone for a moment longer than necessary, her fingers brushing the case as if anchoring herself to something real. Then she returned it with a soft, deliberate motion and an expression Brian couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said again, her eyes locking onto his. There was a flicker in her gaze, some combination of exhaustion, gratitude, and curiosity. She had striking features, but what caught Brian was the faint birthmark just below her right eye, like a shadow of a teardrop that never fell. He nodded, shifting his weight, trying not to stare. "No problem." "You didn't ask who I was?" she said suddenly. He blinked. "Didn't think I needed to." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Most people would. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." Clara looked at him for a moment, her lips parting slightly, as if to say something else, then stopped herself. Instead, she offered a small smile, a strange kind of smile, restrained but real, like it hadn't been used in a while. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Brian," he replied, then added with a shrug, "Just a regular student trying to get by." She gave a soft chuckle, something barely audible. "Nothing about you seems just regular." Brian raised an eyebrow, unsure how to respond, but before he could, the car's headlights swept over them again. The sleek black vehicle returned, now parking neatly along the curb. Clara glanced over, then back at him. "Well, Brian, I hope the world is kind to you." He smiled awkwardly. "I think the world's a little short on kindness these days." "Maybe," she said, stepping back. "But you didn't hesitate. That counts for something." As the driver approached to open her door, Brian reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He glanced at it, his own handwriting scribbled across a torn notebook page. A list of part-time job leads, shifts, deadlines, contact numbers. He folded it again and tucked it back into his coat. Clara noticed. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered on the motion. Her gaze briefly shifted from his tired face to the worn fabric of his coat, to the faded backpack strap, and back to the quiet resilience in his eyes. She nodded once, more to herself than to him. Then she turned and slipped into the back seat of the car. Brian watched as the door shut with a soft click and the car pulled away once more, disappearing into the growing dark. The wind picked up, and he turned his collar up against the chill, his breath fogging the air again. The bus still hadn't come. He sat down on the cold metal bench, hunched forward, hands in his lap. The whole thing felt strange, fleeting, like a dream already beginning to blur. But something about her, her voice, the weight behind her words, lingered in his mind. He leaned back, looking up at the darkening sky. Just another evening. Or maybe not. Brian's life was a careful balancing act, tight-roping between exhaustion and necessity, between what he dreamed of becoming and what each day demanded of him. Most mornings began before dawn, when the city was still silent and the streets were coated with frost. He would slip quietly out of his shared apartment, sling his beat-up backpack over one shoulder, and begin his first shift at the small campus cafe. He poured coffee for students who had slept more comfortably than he had, memorized the orders of professors who never remembered his name, and offered tired smiles to customers too busy to notice the fatigue behind his eyes. After the cafe, he would rush to class, sometimes still smelling faintly of espresso and burned toast, before heading to the university library where he tutored struggling freshmen for a few dollars an hour. His third job was the hardest. On weekends, he worked security for a run-down parking garage 2 miles off campus, nights filled with bitter cold and long stretches of silence. He kept textbooks in the booth and studied when he could, though staying awake was always the real challenge. Back home, his room was no bigger than a closet. The window wouldn't shut properly, and the radiator made a knocking noise that kept him up most nights. But it was home, and from there he called his mother every evening without fail. She lived in a small town hours away, too far to visit often. She had worked as a seamstress for decades until arthritis made it too painful to continue. Now she stayed mostly indoors, her health declining slowly, gently. Brian sent money whenever he could, skipping meals or textbooks to make sure she had enough for medication. Still, he never complained. He held doors open for strangers. He helped an elderly neighbor carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs. Once, when he saw a man huddled beneath a bus shelter in the rain, he quietly offered him half of his sandwich and walked away before the man could thank him. That was the kind of person Brian was. But kindness did not pay tuition. One crisp afternoon, he sat in the campus library staring at an email on the cracked screen of his second-hand laptop. The subject line read, "Scholarship decision, regretfully declined." He read the message 3 times, eyes scanning the words that felt more like a punch than a sentence. We recognize your determination, but your application lacks the exceptional profile we seek. Public achievements, innovation, or standout distinction. In other words, you are not impressive enough. He closed the laptop gently, as if to keep it from absorbing his frustration. Around him, other students laughed, chatted, discussed spring internships abroad. Brian leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His throat tightened. He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of trying so hard and always falling just short. That evening, after his shift at the garage, he returned to campus and sat on a cold stone bench near the science building. The sky above was a deep navy, the stars faint behind city light. He pulled out his phone to check the time, now nearly midnight. The screen was cracked and flickering, the battery just above 5%. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. It wasn't just the scholarship, it was the weight of everything. The unpaid bills, the rejection letters, the constant pressure to prove himself, and the quiet fear that maybe, despite all his effort, he simply wasn't enough. The phone buzzed in his hand. An unknown number flashed across the screen. He almost let it ring out, assuming it was spam or a mistake, but something about the number made him pause. He answered. "Hello?" A familiar voice responded, calm, warm, and unmistakably precise. "Brian? This is Clara Whitmore." He froze. She continued. "I hope this isn't a bad time. I've been meaning to reach out since the other night, but I wanted to make sure I had the right contact." He sat up straighter, heart pounding. "Miss Whitmore? I wasn't expecting—" "I know," she said. "But you left an impression, and I believe when someone makes you stop and think, really think, you don't ignore that." Brian was silent, unsure what to say. Clara's voice softened. "I've been watching the world long enough to know sincerity when I see it. And I'd like to talk again, in person if you're open to it." He blinked, still stunned. "Sure," he said quietly. "Yes, I'd be open to that." "Good," she replied. "Let's meet tomorrow. My driver will pick you up." And just like that, the call ended. Brian stared at the screen long after it had gone dark, the quiet hum of campus all around him. He had no idea what he had just agreed to, but for the first time in a long while, hope stirred, uncertain but undeniable. The next morning, Brian stood on the curb outside his building, shifting nervously as a sleek black car rolled to a stop in front of him. He recognized the driver from that night at the bus stop, calm, formal, with a quiet nod of recognition. The door opened with a soft click. "Mr. Brian," the driver said, "Ms. Whitmore is expecting you." Brian slid into the back seat, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. The interior smelled like leather and pine, and he sat rigidly upright, gripping the strap of his backpack like it might anchor him to reality. They drove through parts of the city he had never seen, past high-rise towers and manicured gardens, until they turned into the underground garage of an enormous glass building. A private elevator carried him silently to the top floor, where the doors opened to a minimalist office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a panoramic view of the city. Clara stood near the window, hands folded, dressed in soft gray. She turned as he entered. "Brian," she greeted him. "Thank you for coming." He nodded cautiously. "Of course, I wasn't sure what to expect. I imagine not." She motioned for him to sit in a chair across from her desk, where a folder already lay waiting. "I owe you some truth," she said, sitting down. "You helped me that night with no idea who I was. So now, let me tell you." She leaned forward slightly. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm the founder and CEO of Whitmore Impact Ventures. We're a social investment company. We fund education, healthcare, sustainability projects. But none of that really matters right now." She opened the folder and turned it toward him. Inside were printed pages, screenshots, photos. Brian stared in confusion. "I asked my team to learn more about you," she said gently. "Not in a creepy way, just enough to understand the kind of person who would offer help without asking anything in return." He flushed. "You looked into me?" "I did," she said. And I found a young man working 3 jobs, supporting his mother, still finding time to help strangers. A student who applied for scholarships and was rejected, not for lack of effort, but because he wasn't flashy enough to be noticed. He sat back, uncertain. Why are you telling me all this? Clara's eyes softened. Because I see you, Brian, and I used to be you. He blinked. I was raised in a trailer park, she said. My parents died in a fire when I was 16. I got into business by accident. Survival turned into innovation, and eventually into success. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how much a small kindness can change everything. She paused. That night, you reminded me. Brian's throat was dry. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Clara replied, but I want to offer you something. She reached into her drawer and pulled out another envelope. This is a full scholarship, tuition, housing, books, everything. You won't owe me a cent. In fact, I'd rather you never pay it back, except by living the kind of life I know you already strive for. Brian's eyes widened. Are you serious? Very. He shook his head, stunned. Why me? Because you're not trying to impress anyone, she said. You're just trying to be decent, and that's rare. She let the moment settle before continuing. I also want to invite you into something more, a project I started last year, called Leading with Kindness. It's a 3-month program for young people with strong values, not just strong resumes. We challenge them, ethically, intellectually, emotionally. We see what happens when leadership begins not with ambition, but with heart. Brian could hardly breathe. You'd be living at the Foundation's retreat center, working in teams, learning from some of the best mentors in the world. If you do well, there's an opportunity for a permanent role with us. He stared at her. This is unreal, Clara smiled. It's real, but it only works if you say yes. He looked down at the scholarship letter, then up at her again. Her face wasn't one of pity or charity, it was of recognition, like she had seen something in him he didn't even know was there. I don't know if I deserve this, he said quietly. You do, she said simply. You earned this the moment you handed me that phone. He sat in silence for a long moment, then finally nodded. Then yes, he said. I'm in. Clara extended her hand, and when he shook it, something shifted, quietly, but profoundly. The boy who once waited at a cold bus stop with nothing left to give had just stepped into a new chapter. And the woman who once thought she had seen everything had just begun to see again. Brian arrived at the Whitmore Foundation's leadership retreat nestled in the hills outside the city, an expansive estate surrounded by trees and silence, far from the noise of campus cafes and city traffic. It felt like stepping into another world, one made not of stress and survival, but of reflection and possibility. He had never seen a place so peaceful. The program brought together 20 young adults from around the country, students, activists, budding entrepreneurs, all with glittering resumes and quiet confidence. Brian, in his plain sweatshirt and secondhand sneakers, felt immediately out of place. During the introductions, he listened to people speak about their achievements, published research, international awards, startups launched before graduation. When his turn came, he simply said, I'm Brian. I work part-time jobs and study biology. I'm here to learn. No one laughed, but he saw the flickers of polite curiosity, the kind that quietly asked, How did you get in? The first week was difficult. The curriculum was designed not just to educate, but to challenge. Group debates on ethical dilemmas, late-night discussions on compassion versus control, real-world simulations that forced uncomfortable decisions. The others spoke fluently about policy and theory. Brian listened, quietly absorbing everything. But when a group project hit a roadblock, an interpersonal clash between 2 dominant personalities, Brian was the only one who stepped in with patience instead of pressure. He didn't try to outsmart or outtalk anyone. He simply brought them together, one by one, listened to their frustrations, and gently reminded them why they were all here in the first place. It's not about being right, he said. It's about doing what's good. That simple line quieted the storm. By the end of the week, their group had delivered one of the most cohesive presentations in the program. From that point forward, people began to look at Brian differently. He didn't lead with charisma. He led by presence. He was the one who noticed when someone skipped breakfast and quietly left a sandwich by their door. The one who stayed behind after a heated discussion to ask if someone was okay. The one who, despite having so little, gave freely. Midway through the program, each participant received a modest stipend to cover incidentals, gas, clothes, phone bills. For Brian, it meant relief. He could finally send something extra to his mom. But one afternoon, he found his roommate Mateo packing to leave. Mateo had missed several sessions, distracted, distant. Brian had assumed he was just disengaged, but now Mateo looked defeated. "What happened?" Brian asked. Mateo shook his head, embarrassed. "My brother had an accident. I need to fly home. I don't have enough for the ticket and I can't ask my family. They're already drowning in hospital bills." Brian hesitated for only a second. He went to his room, opened the envelope with the stipend and handed it to Mateo. "Take it," he said. Mateo stared at him. "I can't. That's your money. You need it more." Mateo hugged him tightly, unable to speak. Later that week, Clara received an anonymous notification from the program coordinator that one participant had quietly given up their own support funds to help another. She didn't need to ask who. She already knew. She watched Brian from a distance more closely after that. How he listened during sessions, how others gravitated toward him, how he never spoke to impress, only to offer truth. In a world that often rewarded volume over value, he remained steady and soft-spoken. One evening, she sat in the back of a seminar room as Brian led a small discussion about invisible leadership, the kind that doesn't announce itself but works beneath the surface to uplift others. He spoke not from theory but from lived experience. "When I didn't have enough," he said, "someone saw something in me. They didn't give me money. They gave me trust. That's what changes people." Clara felt something shift in her chest. She had created this program to find future leaders, but for the first time, she wondered if Brian was something rarer than even that. He was someone who could quietly, gently change the world, not by demanding it follow him, but by reminding it how to care. And in watching him, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The trip was unplanned, or at least that was how Clara framed it. On the final week of the leadership program, she approached Brian quietly after a group session. "I'm heading out to Ridgewell tomorrow," she said. "It's a small town we're trying to bring clean water access to. Would you like to come with me?" Brian blinked. "Seriously? Me?" She smiled. "Yes. You." The next morning, they boarded a small foundation plane and flew over rolling hills and farmlands to a remote area that didn't appear on most modern maps. Ridgewell was a forgotten town, weather-worn homes, dry fields, a single school that shared power with the fire station. The people welcomed Clara like an old friend. She hugged them, listened intently, asked questions no one else ever bothered to ask. But Brian noticed something else. She kept looking over her shoulder, as if searching for something she couldn't name. That evening they sat outside a local family's home, sipping sweet tea under a tin-roof porch. The sun dipped low and children chased each other barefoot in the dust. "I grew up in a place like this," Clara said softly. "Maybe even worse." Brian turned toward her, sensing something shift. "My father was a mechanic," she continued. "My mother worked nights at a diner. We had nothing. And then one day, we had even less." She paused. "They died in a fire. The kind no one covered on the news. I was 16. After that, I scraped my way into community college, found a mentor, built a company from scratch, made my first million before I turned 30. And still, I felt like I owed the world something it had stolen from me." Brian listened without interrupting. "But business, it changes people," she went on. "I partnered with someone I trusted. He gutted my company behind my back. I lost everything overnight." She looked out toward the horizon, her expression unreadable. "Everyone thought I would walk away, but I rebuilt, stronger, smarter, colder." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of cicadas and distant laughter. "I'm not good at trusting people anymore," she admitted. Brian nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "But then you handed me your phone," she said, "without asking who I was, without calculating anything." He offered a half smile. Seemed like the right thing to do. It was, she said. And ever since then, you've been undoing things inside me I didn't even know were locked. He blinked, surprised. You don't know what you've done, Brian, Clara said quietly. But you're making me believe in people again. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not the power or polish, but the worn edges of someone who had fought long and hard just to stay whole. I'm glad, he said gently, because people believe in you too, more than you know. For a moment, the coolness that usually shielded her cracked. She laughed, a short, surprised sound that startled even her. I haven't laughed like that in years, she admitted, covering her mouth. Brian leaned back, watching the stars appear above them. Maybe we both needed this trip. Maybe, she whispered. They sat in silence after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because what had been said was enough. That night, as Clara watched Brian help unload water filters from the truck, laughing with the local kids and translating instructions with patience and grace, she felt something deeper than admiration. She felt trust. And for a woman who had built her life on walls and distance, that was everything. The celebration was small, intimate, just the participants of the leadership program, a few foundation staff, and Clara herself. They gathered in a quiet garden behind the Whitmore estate, strung with soft lights that swayed gently in the night breeze. Laughter echoed between the trees, glasses clinked, and the scent of jasmine hung in the air. Clara stood off to the side, a flute of sparkling water in her hand, watching Brian speak with a few of the younger mentees. He was animated, warm, and as always humble, still surprised by the attention he was receiving after the program's success. But Clara watched him with something more than pride, something she hadn't wanted to name. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and music drifted faintly from a nearby speaker, she approached him beneath the hanging lights. "Brian," she said, her voice softer than usual. He turned, surprised. "Hey, I was just about to find you. I beat you to it." She smiled, then gestured toward a bench beneath a flowering tree. "Walk with me?" They sat side by side in comfortable silence for a moment, before Clara reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded letter. "I was going to give this to you officially tomorrow," she said, "but I'm not great at waiting." Brian unfolded the paper slowly. His eyes scanned the heading, Whitmore Foundation, Director of Human Impact Initiatives. He looked up, stunned. "Director? It's more than a title," Clara said. "It's a voice, a platform, and I trust yours." Brian's hands trembled slightly. "Why me?" Clara met his gaze. "Because you lead with heart, because you remind people what matters, and because I believe the world needs more people like you in positions that can actually make change." He smiled, touched beyond words. But she wasn't done. She hesitated, then stood up, pacing a few steps before turning to face him. "There's something else," she said, "something harder to say." Brian stood too, sensing the shift in her tone. "I've spent most of my life thinking that love was either a weakness or a distraction," she admitted. "That if I let someone in, I'd lose focus or control. Or both." He didn't speak, only watched her with open, steady eyes. "But then I met you," Clara continued, "and for the first time, I didn't feel pulled away from myself. I felt grounded, safe." Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "I've had wealth, status, success, but I've never had someone who made me feel like I was enough. Until you." Brian took a slow step forward, heart pounding. "I know the age difference is a factor," she said quickly, "and the roles we play, and the headlines it would spark, and all the reasons it doesn't make sense on paper." He reached out gently and took her hand. "But life isn't lived on paper," he said softly. "And I don't know what's coming next. I don't have the answers, or a perfect plan. But I know this, when I'm near you, I'm not afraid of the future anymore." She looked at him, eyes wet but steady. "I want to walk into that future," he said, "with you." They stood there for a long moment, fingers intertwined beneath the soft lights, two souls from different worlds now standing side by side, not as charity and recipient, not as mentor and student, but as something deeper, something real, and in that moment the walls that had once protected them both quietly fell away. 2 years later, the world looked very different for Brian. He stood at the podium of a grand international summit on youth leadership and global compassion, his suit tailored but simple, his presence calm yet magnetic. The audience, thousands from around the world, watched in respectful silence. Behind him, a giant screen displayed images from humanitarian projects, clean water initiatives in rural villages, youth education centers in low-income communities, and mental health programs for underserved populations. Brian had become more than a name. He was a voice for kindness, a face of quiet resilience. Alongside Clara, he had helped launch over 30 programs under the Whitmore Foundation's expanded vision. Where she once handled every detail herself, now Brian was her trusted counterpart, a symbol that compassion could be strategic and leadership could be tender. As cameras flashed and dignitaries took notes, Brian leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice steady and warm. "There was a time," he said, "not long ago, when I had nothing but a cracked phone, a second-hand backpack, and the hope that maybe someday things would get better. I wasn't special, I was just surviving." He paused, letting the room breathe. "Then one evening, waiting at a cold bus stop, a stranger asked to borrow my phone. I could have said no, I almost did, but something, maybe tiredness, maybe instinct, told me to say yes." He glanced toward the front row, where Clara sat, her eyes shining, her hand resting gently over her heart. "That moment, that one act of trust, became a turning point," he continued. "Because the stranger I helped wasn't just anyone. She was someone who saw in me what I hadn't yet seen in myself. And she changed my life. Not with money, not with power, but with belief." A hush fell over the room, deep and reverent. "I used to think that small moments didn't matter," Brian said. "But now I know it's the small moments that change everything." He smiled. "Never underestimate the impact of one choice, one kindness, one yes, because sometimes one call is all it takes to rewrite a future." The audience erupted in applause, long, sustained, heartfelt. After the speech, Brian stepped down from the stage and found Clara waiting near the edge of the crowd. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, full of pride and something softer, something deeper. He took her hand and they exited the venue quietly, choosing not to linger in the spotlight. It was never about that for either of them. That evening, they walked barefoot along a quiet beach, the sun dipping low and gold behind the waves. The world felt still, wrapped in the glow of a moment they had both earned, step by step, heart by heart. Clara leaned against his shoulder, her fingers laced with his. "You've come a long way from that bus stop," she said, smiling into the breeze. Brian laughed gently. "And you've come a long way from hiding behind glass towers." They walked on in silence, waves brushing their feet, their footprints marking a path behind them. At the horizon, sky and sea melted into one. And beneath that endless orange light, two souls, once strangers in a passing moment, stood hand in hand, proof that sometimes a single phone call really can change everything. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of kindness, chance, and the quiet power of saying yes. If Brian's story touched your heart, reminded you that even the smallest acts of compassion can ripple into something life-changing, then we invite you to become part of something bigger. At Soul-Stirring Stories, we believe in celebrating the goodness in people, the hidden heroes, the silent moments that shape destinies, and the love that grows where no one expects it. Subscribe now to Soul-Stirring Stories so you never miss another tale that speaks to your soul, because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us how beautiful the human heart can be. We'll see you in the next one.